The U.S. is not currently at war with any country, but if it believes it is, it can do extraordinary things.
President Trump has invoked a wartime law known as the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to help speed up mass deportations.
They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion.
Donald Trump has invoked a very old law from 1798 to deport hundreds of Venezuelans the White House accuses of being gang members, flying them to a mega prison in El Salvador while avoiding the immigration court system entirely. But there are three problems that we'll try to tackle here. One, this Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is a wartime act. How do you use a wartime measure when there's no war? Two, this use of extreme authority is so rare, a federal judge blocked Trump from doing it, ordering the planes full of migrants to be turned back midair. But they did not, potentially defying a legal order. And three, if the US president considers migration an act of war, where does it stop? The so-called Alien Enemies Act is actually called an act respecting alien enemies. It was, in fact, signed all the way back in July of 1798, and it can legally be used whenever there shall be a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or when any invasion or predatory incursion shall be perpetrated, attempted, or threatened. So we're talking about wartime here. And what it does is it declares all natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government, being males of the age of 14 years and upwards, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So in war, the US government is allowed to arrest, imprison, and or deport any male over 14 who is from the hostile nation. This has been done before.
When we think of World War II and the internment camps, we usually think of the US citizens of Italian or German or especially Japanese descent that were put into camps. What we often don't think of is the fact that this Alien Enemies Act was used not to do that, but to put non-citizens in detention or to deport them based simply on their national origin.
There are only 3 times in US history this act has been invoked: the Second World War, the First World War, and the War of 1812. So most recently, 80 plus years ago, and every time in a very clear instance of declared war. This is something the White House is very likely aware of, because in moving to deport hundreds of alleged criminals from US soil, look at how they've characterized the presence of Tren de Aragua. That's a transnational criminal gang operating in the United States, a designated foreign terrorist organization that has unlawfully infiltrated the United States and is carrying out irregular warfare.
The invasion of our country. They invaded our country.
The claim that a criminal organization constitutes a terrorist group, constitutes irregular warfare, is just an incredible stretch of what these words and what these concepts actually mean. I think he is trying to make a claim for these powers that will not stand up in court, but will be persuasive to his strongest supporters.
This fits into a long-standing pattern with Trump, where he is testing the limits of language, what the word of the law allows him to do. This was true during his first term, when he justified steel and aluminum tariffs as being a national security issue.
We need great steel makers, great aluminum makers for defense. When it comes to a time when our country can't make aluminum and steel, you almost don't have much of a country.
It was true at the very start of his second term, on day 1, when he declared the border crisis a national emergency. And of course, Tariffs 2.0, implemented under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, with the rationale being that drugs like fentanyl pose an extraordinary threat to US national security.
Ultimately, calling something an emergency is a way to get around normal limitations on presidential power and a way to get around having to go through Congress to get them to enact a law.
So back to the deportations. If the Trump administration believes itself to be at war with criminal gangs, Then, critics argue, it can sidestep due process altogether. It can order sweeping arrests and deportations without ever needing to test their accusations or evidence in any court of law. How can the White House be sure everyone they're deporting is guilty of the crimes they're accused of? This, experts say, would represent a significant change to the established rule of law.
If you really consider it a war or an invasion, it would allow the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, even for native-born citizens. And in plain English, that would mean they would have the power to detain people without charges or trials.
Sir, there's been some criticism that the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 other times. They were all during times of war. Do you feel that you're using it appropriately right now?
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level.
The question we've raised about whether a wartime measure can be invoked without a war, the American Civil Liberties Union has sued over.
Fundamentally, what's going on is a separation of powers problem. The Alien Enemies Act lays out very, very specific criteria for when it can be used. The Trump administration has ignored that by applying it to a gang rather than a foreign government or nation.
And a federal judge in Washington, D.C., at least very tentatively, appeared to agree. He put a temporary block on Trump's use of this Alien Enemies Act to deport the alleged gang members in question, and verbally even went one step further, making clear to Trump's legal team this is something you need to make sure is complied with immediately, however that's accomplished, whether turning around the plane or not. But the plane in question did not turn around. And here's where the timing matters. The judge issued his order shortly before 7 p.m. in Washington, D.C. this past Saturday, referring to information unrebutted by the government that flights are actively departing. The same evening, the ACLU says it believes 2 U.S. government flights are in the air. In El Salvador, which is 2 time zones west, this ruling would have come down at around 5 p.m. But the following morning, so on a Sunday, a post from El Salvador's president says simply, "Oopsie, too late." Then another post confirming the flights. Today, the first 238 members of the Venezuelan criminal organization, Tren de Aragua, arrived in our country. Attached was a 3-minute video set to music of men in handcuffs being marched off of a plane, and clearly at nighttime. Which raises the question, did the judge order those planes grounded, but they proceeded anyway, landing that same night, well after the ruling, with El Salvador's president celebrating the arrival the following morning? Basically, did the Trump administration ignore an explicit court order? No, says the White House press secretary, because the plane load of deportees had already been removed from U.S. territory, and she questions whether the judge in this case ever had jurisdiction at all. A single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft carrying foreign alien terrorists who were physically expelled from U.S. soil.
We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
President, did the administration actually, speaking of orders, violate Judge Boasberg's order in sending back the Venezuelan gang members and not bringing the plane back?
I don't know. You have to speak to the lawyers about that.
Are you planning to do more deportations?
I can tell you this, these were bad people. That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres.
The question worth asking right now is, what is Trump's long game here?
He's a lot more willing to try things than your average politician. He is willing to go places that, people say he shouldn't or that other politicians haven't. And if it doesn't work out, he pulls back on it.
I will rescue every city and town that has been invaded and conquered, and we will put these vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail or kick them the hell out of our country.
In this case, Trump's executive order to deport alleged gang members and using a wartime act to skirt the usual due process, which would ordinarily seek to verify such basic things as, are you sure you have the right guy? It's narrowly and mainly focused on one criminal gang, the Tren de Aragua, but that's just the start.
We're using the Alien Enemies Act, think of that, 1798, boy, that's a long time ago, to target and dismantle every migrant criminal network operating on American soil, and it gives tremendous authority to everybody to straighten out our country.
There are two parts to that worth thinking about. One is that Trump is, by his own admission, looking to use this newfound extraordinary power, avoiding the traditional court system, to target every migrant criminal network. The task of establishing precisely who belongs to which group the government designates as criminal, that, in Trump's view, should no longer be an issue decided by courts. But the larger question is what he means when he speaks more broadly of the tremendous authority to straighten out the country.
I think it's a very clear slippery slope. I mean, I think if you look at the last decade of Donald Trump's rhetoric, there's a clear undertone that some people are more American than others. Some people are entitled to the protection of the law, some people are not.
Saying we're going to straighten out the country presumes so much. It presumes that there are people coming to the US who are all criminals, which is not the case. And it's vague. And that's part of the problem, is you have a president using an extreme amount of authority with a vague basis and justification that is largely fear-based.
Trump's position is that he is making America safe again, and he's willing to pay for it. $6 million to El Salvador for imprisoning the hundreds of people the US just deported. But the longer-term question, if due process can be dispensed with, is there a steeper price to pay for consolidating yet more power within the US presidency?